Good evening, everyone. I'm here and I would love to tell you a story. At the end, after we finish this chapter, I would like to share an experience I had today, and it's dedicated to all those families that are losing loved ones and those workers who are working with them. Thank you all for coming. It's great to see you. Hello, William. Nice to have you here. And let's see, Robert Hart. Cool. Good to see you, Robert. Tonight, I would like to tell you, I took a walk today, and I've been so burdened with the outbreak of this virus and feeling very trapped in my house. But very thankful that I'm here. And tea time tomorrow, if we don't have wind like we do today, it will be out on the front porch, and we'll talk about starting to be outside. Too windy today, I couldn't record. So tonight we're going to read the next chapter. I can figure out where I just put the book. Here it is. Sorry. A little discombobulating. So the last chapter, we're on 14. No, 15. Triumph of the Witch was the last one. So at the end, the queen had been victorious. The wicked witch queen had been victorious, and she had tied up Aslan and killed him, and he was tied down to the stone table. So now we're going to read about the deeper magic from before the dawn of time. Get comfortable in your seats, get a cup of tea or have dinner and enjoy the reading. And afterwards I'll share some objects I found today and a little parable about where we are in the world at this moment. Deeper magic from the before the dawn of time. While the two girls still crouched in the bushes with their hands over their faces, remember they were hiding and watched all this happen with the witch and with Aslan. They heard the voice of the witch calling out, "Now follow me all, and we will set about what remains of this war. It will not take us long to crush the human vermin and the traitors now that the great fool, the great cat, lies dead." Oh, she's so wicked. Hello, Bill and Jesse. Nice to see you all. "Now follow me all, and we will set about what remains of this war," she said. "It will not take us long to crush the human vermin and the traitors now that the great fool, the cat, is dead." At this moment, the children were for a few seconds in very great danger. For with wild cries and a noise of skirling pipes and shrill horns blowing, the whole of that vile rabble came sweeping off the hilltop, down the slope, right past the girls' hiding place. They felt the specters go by them like a cold wind. They felt the ground shake beneath them under the galloping feet of the minotaurs. And overhead there went a flurry of foul wings and blackness of vultures and giant bats. At any other time they would have trembled with fear, but now the sadness and shame of horror of Aslan's death so filled their minds that they hardly thought of it. As soon as the hi Nathan. As soon as the wood was silent again, Susie and Lucy crept out into the open hilltop. The moon was getting low and the thin clouds were passing across her, but still they could see the shape of the lion lying dead in his bonds. And down they both knelt in the wet grass and kissed his face and stroked his beautiful fur. How sad. What was left of it? Fur had all been cut off. And tried until they could cry no more. Then they looked at each other and held each other's hands for mere loneliness and cried again, and then again were silent. At last, Lucy said, "I can't bear to look at that horrible muzzle. I wonder if we could take it off." So they tried, and after a lot of working at it, for their fingers were cold and it was now the deepest, darkest part of the night, they succeeded. And when they saw his face without it, they burst out crying again without the muzzle. They kissed it and fondled it and wiped away the blood and the foam as well as they could. And it was all more lonely and hopeless and horrid than I know how to describe. "I wonder, could we untie him as well?" said Susan presently. But the enemies, out of pure spitefulness, had drawn the cords so tight that the girls could make nothing of the knots. I hope no one reads this book has been quite as miserable as Susan and Lucy were that night. But if you've been up all night and cried till you have no more tears left in you, you will know that there comes in the end a sort of quietness. You feel as if nothing was ever going to happen again. Feels a little bit like right now, actually. At any rate, that was how it felt to these two. Hours and hours seemed to go by in this dead calm, and they hardly noticed that they were getting colder and colder. But at last, Lucy noticed two other things. One was that the sky on the east side of the hill was a little less dark than it had been an hour ago. The other was some tiny movement going on in the grass at her feet. At first, she took no interest in this. What did it matter? Nothing mattered now. Aslan was dead. But at last she saw that whatever it was had begun to move up the upright stones of the stone table. And now whatever they were moving about on Aslan's body. She peered closer. They were little gray things. "Ugh," said Susan from the other side of the table. "How beastly. There are horrid little mice crawling all over him. Go away, you little beasts." And she raised her hand to frighten them away. "Wait," said Lucy, who had been looking at them more closely still. "Can you see what they're doing?" Both girls bent down and stared. "I do believe, but how queer. They're nibbling away at the cords. They're nibbling away at the cords." Excuse me. Sorry. "I do believe," said, "but how queer. They're nibbling away at the cords." "That's what I thought," said Lucy. "I think they're friendly mice. Poor little things. They don't realize that he's dead. They think it'll do some good untying him." It was quite definitely lighter by now. Each of the girls noticed for the first time the white face of the other. They could see the mice nibbling away, dozens and dozens, even hundreds of little field mice. And at last, one by one, the ropes were all gnawed through. The sky in the east was whitish by now, and the stars were getting fainter. All except one very big one low down on the eastern horizon. They felt colder than they had been all night. The mice crept away again. The girls cleared away the remains of the gnawed ropes. Aslan looked more like himself without them. Every moment his dead face looked nobler as the light grew and they could see it better. In the wood behind them, a bird gave a chuckling sound. It's been so still for hours and hours that it startled them. Then another bird answered it. Soon there were birds singing all over the place. It was quite definitely early morning now, not late night. "I am so cold," said Lucy. "So am I," said Susan. "Let's walk about a bit." They walked to the eastern edge of the hill and looked down. The one big star had almost disappeared. The country looked all dark gray, But beyond, at the very end of the world, the sea showed pale. The sky had begun to turn red. They walked to and fro more times than they could count between the dead Aslan and the eastern ridge, trying to keep warm, and oh, how tired their legs felt. Then at last, as they stood for a moment looking out toward the sea in Cair Paravel, which they could now just make out, the red turned to gold along the line where the sea and the sky met, and very slowly up came the edge of the sun. At that moment they heard from behind them a loud noise, a great cracking, deafening noise, as if a giant had broken a giant's plate. "What's that?" said Lucy, clutching Susan's arm. I feel afraid to turn around, said Susan. Something awful is happening. They're doing something worse to him, said Lucy. Come on. And as she turned, pulling Susan round with her, the rising of the sun had made everything look so different. All colors and shadows were changed. Yet for a moment they didn't see the important thing. Then they did. The stone table was broken into two pieces by a great crack down that ran down it from end to end, a great crack that ran down from it from end to end, and there was no Aslan. Oh, 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 cried the girls, rushing back to the table. Oh, it's too bad, sobbed Lucy. They might have left the body alone. Who's done it? Cried Susan. What does it mean? Is it more magic? Yes, said a great voice behind their backs. It is more magic. They looked around. There, shining in the sunrise, larger than they had seen him before, shaking his mane, for it had apparently grown again, stood Aslan himself. Wow. Oh, Aslan, cried both children, staring up at him, almost as much frightened as they were glad, of course. Aren't you dead then, dear Aslan, said Lucy. Not now, said Aslan. You're not, asked Susan in a shaky voice. She couldn't bring herself to say the word ghost. Aslan stooped his golden head toward her and licked her forehead. The warmth of his breath and a rich sort of smell that seemed to hang about his hair came all over her. Do I look it? He said. Oh, you're real, you're real. Oh, Aslan, cried Lucy, and both girls flung themselves upon him and covered him with kisses. But what does it all mean? Asked Susan when they were somewhat calmer. It means, said Aslan, that though the witch knew the deep magic, there is magic deeper still which she did not know. Her knowledge goes back only to the dawn of time. But if she could have looked a little further back into the stillness and the darkness before time dawned, she would have read there a different incantation. She would have known that when a willing victim who had committed no treachery was killed in a traitor's stead, the table would crack, and death itself would start working backwards. And now? Oh, yes, now, said Lucy, jumping up and clapping her hands. Oh, children, said the lion, I feel my strength coming back to me. Oh, children, catch me if you can. He stood for a second, his eyes very bright, his limbs quivering, lashing himself with his tail. Then he made a leap high over their heads and landed on the other side of the table. Laughing, though she didn't know why, Lucy scrambled over it to reach him. Aslan leaped again. A mad chase began. Round and round the hilltop he led them, now hopelessly out of their reach, now letting them almost catch his tail, now diving between them, now tossing them in the air with his huge and beautiful velvety paws, and catching them again, and now stopping unexpectedly so that all three of them rolled over together in a happy, laughing heap of fur and arms and legs. It was such a romp as no one has ever had except in Narnia. And whether it was more like playing with a thunderstorm or playing with a kitten, Lucy could never make up her mind. And the funny thing was that when all three finally lay together, panting in the sun, the girls no longer felt in the least tired or hungry or thirsty. "And now," said Aslan presently, "to business. I feel I am going to roar. You had better put your fingers in your ears." And they did. And Aslan stood up, and when he opened his mouth to roar, his face became so terrible that they did not dare to look at it. And they saw all the trees in front of him bend from the blast of his roaring, as grass bends in a meadow before the wind, like we had today. Then he said, "We have a long journey to go. You must ride on me." He crouched down, and the children climbed onto his warm golden back, and Susan sat first, holding on tightly to his mane, and Lucy sat behind, holding on tightly to Susan. And with a great heave, he rose underneath them and then shot off faster than any horse could go, down and full into the thick of the forest. That ride was perhaps the most wonderful thing that happened to them in Narnia. Have you ever had a gallop on a horse? Think of that, and then take away the heavy noise of the hooves and the jingle of the bits, and imagine instead the almost noiseless padding of great paws. Then imagine instead of the black or gray or chestnut back of the horse, the soft roughness of golden fur and the mane flying back in the wind. And then imagine you're going about twice as fast as the fastest racehorse. But this is a mount that doesn't need to be guided and never grows tired. He rushes on and on, never missing his footing, never hesitating, threading his way with perfect skill between tree trunks, jumping over bush and briar and the smaller streams, wading the larger, swimming the largest of all. And you are riding not on a road, nor in a park, nor even on the downs, but right across Narnia in spring, down solemn avenues of beech, across sunny glades of oak, through wild orchards of snow-white cherry trees, past roaring waterfalls and mossy rocks and echoing caverns, up windy slopes alight with gorse bushes, and across the shoulders of heathery mountains, and along giddy ridges, and down again into the wild valleys, and out into acres of blue flowers. It was nearly midday when they found themselves looking down a steep hillside at a castle. A little toy castle it looked from where they stood, which seemed to be all pointy towers. But the lion was rushing down at such a speed that it grew larger every moment, and before they had time even to ask themselves what it was, they were already on level with it. And now it no longer looked like a toy castle, but rose frowning in front of them. No face over the battlements, and the gates were fast shut. And Aslan, not slacking his pace, rushed straight as a bullet toward it. "The witch's home," he cried. "Now, children, hold tight." Next moment, the whole world seemed to turn upside down, and the children felt as if they'd left their insides behind them. For the lion had gathered himself together for a greater leap than any he had yet made, and jumped, or you may call it flying rather than jumping, right over the castle wall. The two girls, breathless but unhurt, found themselves tumbling off his back in the middle of a wide stone courtyard full of statues. Here endeth the reading, but I want to share something with you that this, actually I was inspired reading this after what I did today. This morning I was wanted to get a walk and get outside and go up to the mountains or somewhere. Hey Matt, good to see you. So I went up and I found these flowers in a field, and they just somehow reminded me of the fragility of life and all the people that had died, and for their families, people mourning all over the world. This I decided to put it in this vase. It's sort of a living parable, this whole thing I'm going to show you. It has it's a Japanese vase. It was given to me by a friend, and it looks kind of like the earth and this white flower. It reminded me of a wonderful movie and story. It was not wonderful because I was in it, but it's a wonderful story and a movie. And this is it. It's called, many of you have seen it, Many Beautiful Things. You can get it online, and it's really worthwhile. I got the privilege of playing the art critic and curator John Ruskin, and teacher. Well, Lilias Trotter went as a missionary to Algiers. The Missionary Society in London turned her down, and she and two women went on their own to Algiers to rescue women who were too old to be in harems or had too many children. And she started classes, all kinds of craft classes, so they would be self-sufficient, as well as teaching them the scriptures. Well, today when I looking at this vase after I picked the dried flowers, I remembered there was a drawing that she did of desert lilies. This is not it. I couldn't find it. This is one of her journals. Her diaries and journals have photographs and drawings, and these are a wonderful giclée of them. This reminded me of the desert lily. She writes a poem about the desert lily, that it blooms in arid deserts. This is the oleander, which is close. We have lots of oleanders in California. Anyway, I was thinking of Lilias today and her compassion for women who had no place in their culture at all and were desperate. It reminded me of today for many people that are in extenuating circumstances because of this virus. I also came across this, which I thought was really profound. I found it in a thrift store. The mirror is cracked, and I like the fact that the mirror is cracked. It was a memorial. It was a commemoration of the new millennium in the year 2000. There's a thing here. It's from Italy, and it's a relief of a voyage. And I don't know if any of you have been down to the National Gallery. You can look it up, but it reminded me of the 4 stages of life. It's down at the National Gallery, and it shows childhood, boyhood, manhood, and old age. And it's a voyage of a journey, and each one depicts different things. It's really wonderful if you have a chance to look it up online. It's called The Voyage of Life. It's in a rotunda to the left as you go to the place where they usually have the concerts. So this reminded me of where we are today. There was so much hope at the turn of the millennium, and look where we are and what's happening. So we need to pray for our world and for people we love. The last thing is exactly like what was described in the story. I saw this rock. I saw this rock just laying, and with the sunlight it looked a bit different than it does now. But this rock has definite lines that you can see, and it looks to me like, well, it doesn't look quite the same right now, but there's one line, and then there are 2 branches, like our friends and family and children. And to me it just reminded me of all the friendships and the web of relationships that I have that are in Christ. And I just love this rock, and in the sunlight it was quite simple. There you can kind of see it. There's this central thing, and then there are children branching off. When I brought it home, I wondered, and I was looking at it, and all of a sudden I discovered these branches and all the children and everything. It's the Holy Trinity. I just thought it was a prayer for those who are suffering, and for what we have to value and appreciate in our lives. Thank you so much for coming, and I'll see you tomorrow night for the next reading. Have a good night. I'd love any of your comments, anything that you'd like to say, and look forward to tomorrow night. God bless and have a good evening.